Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chowdhury, and I'm the director of the Shorenstein Asia Pacific Research Center here at Stanford University, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the 2025 Shorenstein Journalism Award ceremony. This is APERC's 24th annual award celebration, one of the most important events that we host every year. This award carries forward the legacy of Walter H. Shorenstein, our center's benefactor and friend. Walter foresaw the potential of Asia very early on, and he was very committed to journalism's social contract and its potential to and commitment to speak truth to power. So this award combines two things that Walter cared deeply about. And we remain thankful to him and grateful for the enduring support of the Shorenstein family. The Shorenstein Award recognizes journalists and news outlets whose outstanding report helps global audiences understand Asia and its complexities. And oftentimes, our honorees operate under severe censorship and threats as they fight to uphold freedom and democracy, which applies to the recipient today. This award also affirms APAC's commitment to supporting nuanced, fact-based journalism, especially at a time when truth and those who report it are under attack everywhere. Previous awardees include the likes of Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Ressa, who is the founder of the Philippine news platform Rappler. You may have heard of Maria Ressa and Rappler. In the last couple of years, we've had the Caravan, India's magazine of long-form narrative journalism, known for protecting truth and accountability amid the country's democratic erosion. And most recently, last year, we had Chris Buckley, the New York Times chief China correspondent, who was recognized for his incisive reporting on China's political system and social transformations. And today, we are proud to confer the 2025 Shorenstein Award upon Netra News, Bangladesh's premier public interest media outlet, for its unflinching reportage on human rights abuses and corruption in the country, and for its efforts to establish and safeguard fundamental freedoms. We are delighted to present the award to and hear from Tasneem Khalil, Netra News' founding editor-in-chief, a pioneer of investigative journalism in Bangladesh. First round of applause to Tasneem. I am looking forward to Tasneem's remarks and the following panel discussion. Tasneem will join UC Berkeley's Professor Elora Shehabuddin and the Journal of Democracy's co-editor Will Dobson in conversation with Stanford's our own Jay Hamilton, Professor Hamilton. We will also leave time at the end for a Q&A session. So if you have questions, please be prepared. I'd like to note that both Will Dobson and Jay Hamilton, both of them also serve on the Shorenstein Award Judging Committee, and we are deeply grateful for their time and contributions in this role. And let me also extend my appreciation to our three other judges who could not be here today. The first, Anna Fifield, Asia Pacific editor at the Washington Post and winner of our 2018 Shorenstein Award. The second is Louisa Lim, associate professor of audiovisual journalism at the University of Melbourne. Last but not least, Raju Narisetti, the leader of McKinsey Group Global Publishing at McKinsey and Company. And now I invite Jay to introduce our honoree before we present him with the Shorenstein Award. And let me introduce Jay briefly. At Stanford, Jay Hamilton is Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, the Hearst Professor of Communication, and Director of the Journalism Program. He's an award-winning scholar and teacher. In recent years, his research has focused on the field of computational journalism, and his publications include the 2016 book, Democracy's Detectives, The Economics of Investigative Journalism. So please join me in welcoming Jay Hamilton and celebrating Netra News and Tasneem Khalil. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyo. Good afternoon. I do direct the journalism program. I love to focus on accuracy, so I'm going to read some of my remarks just to make sure that I get them right. So I apologize for that, but it's in the quest for accuracy. So it's my pleasure to represent the Shorenstein Journalism Award Judging Committee and to introduce our honoree. Today we celebrate Netra News, Bangladesh's premier independent, nonpartisan, investigative media outlet. The 2025 Journalism Award recognizes Netra News for its bold investigations into high-level corruption and abuses and for championing the rule of law in Bangladesh, which has been one of the world's most difficult environments for practicing journalism. While the award formally honors Netra News, it is equally a tribute to its founding editor-in-chief, Tasneem Khalil, a pioneer of investigative reporting in Bangladesh. Tasneem previously worked for the Bangladeshi English-language Daily Star, CNN, and Human Rights Watch. Tasneem was declared a prisoner of conscience by Amnesty International in 2007 following his detention by the Bangladeshi Military Intelligence Agency. He had to flee to Sweden later that year. From exile, he has continued to champion freedom of expression and expose abuses of power. His 2015 book, Jalad, Death Squads, and State Terror in South Asia, traces human rights violations in Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka to a system of state terror patronized by international sponsors. Tasneem established Netra News in 2019 to hold Bangladesh's regime and security forces to account and defend fundamental freedoms in the country. Under his leadership, despite censorship and continued threats, Netra News' team of dedicated journalists has continued to report fearlessly in both Bangla and English, combining offshore editorial independence with on-the-ground reporting inside the country. Its investigations have revealed ministerial corruption, extrajudicial killings and torture by security forces, deadly custodial abuse by military personnel, an illegal secret prison run by Bangladesh's military intelligence agency, and state-sponsored cybercrime, to highlight some examples. This is accountability journalism at its purest, reporting that not only informs, but also confronts power and demands justice. In summer 2024, as student-led protests swept Bangladesh and the government-imposed violent crackdowns and internet blackouts, Netra News became a lifeline of verified information, documenting events that ultimately led to the fall of the Prime Minister's authoritarian regime. The newsroom's coverage, produced under immense personal risk to contributors inside the country, stood out for its professionalism, depth, and commitment to human rights. Netra News' work has earned international recognition, including the Sigma Award and the Global Shining Light Award. But perhaps the most profound measure of its impact is the trust it has garnered among Bangladesh's citizens who continue to push for democracy. On behalf of Stanford University's Asia Pacific Research Center, it is our honor to present the 2025 Shorenstein Journalism Award to Netra News and to recognize Tasneem Khalil for his leadership and courage in advancing human rights and press freedom. I'd like to invite Keo back to the stage, along with Tasneem, for the award presentation. You stand in the middle. We call this a photo opportunity. Okay.
Do I look good? Yes. Very good.
Very good. Thank you.
Stage is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It is yours.
Oh. Excuse me for the fumbling that you are going to witness now because I'll have to constantly switch my glasses. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Shorenstein, the award committee. This is, I would say, the third most third happiest day in my life. I'm going to censor what were the first two. And before I begin, I remember with deep love and deep admiration my journalist colleagues who have been killed in the line of duty in places like Palestine and Ukraine. Whatever journalism we carry out and we continue to carry out, we must always remember that we are actually building on the shoulders of those giants. So the talk today I am planning to give is titled Defending Democracy in Bangladesh, which we also borrow this biblical saying to comfort the afflicted. So whatever I'm going to tell you today from this podium can be encapsulated in this photograph. Here, I am talking to a person, a woman, as you can see. Her name is Hazera Khatun, a Bangladeshi woman whose son was abducted by an elite police unit called the Rapid Action Battalion. And I'd like to describe her as the afflicted, and me, the journalist, trying to comfort her, as you can see here. But there is more than that. This is the story of Netra News. This is the story of how we, as a public interest journalism newsroom, witnessed the struggle of heroes like Hazera, who are the very people who confront power. And we, as public interest journalists and as investigative journalists, we witness that. I do not subscribe to this very clunky maxim that goes, journalists give voice to the voiceless and such nonsense. We are witnesses and we try to document what we see. So Hazera is my hero, and the location of this image is very important. We are sitting inside a compound at the headquarters of Rapid Action Battalion. And the walls you see are the walls of a secret detention facility called the TFI cell, the Task Force for Interrogation Cell. And this is where Hazera's son most likely was kept, secretly detained, victim of a campaign of enforced disappearances. And me and Hazera, after the fall of Sheikh Hasina, we went to visit this place. And I asked her if she wants to go inside. And she said, no, I don't. I'll just sit here, and I want you to sit here with me and just chat. And that's what exactly we were doing here. So in order to understand the history of, or the story of Netra News, you need to understand the importance of this photograph I carry in my heart as the editor-in-chief of Netra News. So there is this maxim, right? Public interest journalism means comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. I don't really like the second part of it, so I have sort of like modified it a little bit. Boring for J. Hamilton, actually. So confronting the afflicted and confronting power. And that is at the heart of the kind of journalism Netra News aspires to practice. And on the question of power, we need to understand that us journalists, we are some of the most powerful people in the society. Be it a democratic society, we are cocky enough to brag about defending democracy, like in places like the United States or in Sweden, but we are also, sometimes we are also able to brag about contributing towards toppling authoritarian regimes. And I think I'm gonna go into that details within a few minutes. We need to understand that power always serves some interest. And this is the most important thing to understand whenever we are talking about journalism and the role of the media in the society. So we have seen in the history of journalism, in the history of media, wherever it is, power in the form of journalism, in the form of media, serves corporate interest, profit interest. It also serves partisan political interests. Sometimes it serves religious interests. And we have, when we set out to defend democracy in Bangladesh and defend human rights in Bangladesh, we adopted the model of public interest journalism, which is, we are trying to say that our journalism has only one interest to serve, and that is the public. We recognize that the media is the fourth estate, the fourth pillar of this extremely powerful institution of the modern state. And we are supposed to always confront the other powers or power centers involved. We are supposed to monitor the judiciary. We are supposed to confront and monitor the executive branch. We are supposed to monitor and confront the legislative branch. And these are all very academic takes on journalism, right? And it does, I mean, since I'm at Stanford, I think I can take this freedom of being a little bit academic and scholarly here. I remember at Malmö University, my bachelor's thesis was on human rights journalism. And while preparing for the thesis, we were supposed to attend a method class, right? And the instructor, the professor, introduced us to lots of methods, you know, qualitative studies and quantitative studies and statistical this and, you know, that. And then the final point he made is that there is one thing I want, I mean, there are these, you know, 20 methods I have discussed, and there is one method, one study I do not want you to do, because this is so very hard. You should never do it. So this is just a noted warning. Never attempt to do a normative study. And me being me, that's exactly what I decided to do. So I decided to do a normative study, and borrowing from scholars before me, I wrote my thesis on how journalism, or what normative roles a newsroom should play in defending democracy and human rights. So in my paper, I argued that in defending democracy and human rights, a newsroom must or should or ought to carry out four roles. One is monitorial, that is, work as an independent monitor of power. Number two is the facilitative role. We should be able to bring together all the what shall I say, conflicting parties in a society, the MAGA people and the woke people, maybe, I mean, referring to the context you have, the radical role as in, challenging power with the aim of changing the very nature of the state and institutions in favor of freedoms and rights. And then also collaborative role, which is sometimes it is necessary to collaborate to power. So when time came, back in 2019, and we were setting up Netra News, because we felt that the space for independent journalism inside the country was completely gone. And I was tasked with coming up with the editorial mission and philosophy and the structure and the coverage profile of Netra News. And I thought, wow, I mean, this is why I most likely wrote my bachelor's thesis, right? This is my chance to actually experiment something. I have written something, the impossible normative study I was asked not to do. And this is my chance to see if what I wrote actually makes sense or not. So the experiment is that I would set up a newsroom that will not defend democracy in Bangladesh, but it will act as if Bangladesh is a democracy, while it is not. Bangladesh at that time was a one-party police state. It was an authoritarian regime. So what I wanted to really see is that if we set up a newsroom in exile or offshore and start covering Bangladesh as if Bangladesh is just a country like Sweden, or as if Bangladesh is just a country like the United States. We'll not censor ourselves, will not be brewbeaten, will not be fearful, and we will confront power the way journalists are supposed to confront power. And the results, I have to say, I can faithfully report. I mean, in recent months, I mean, there are hundreds of propaganda pieces against Netra News that says we are one of the key actors in toppling the one-party police state of Sheikh Hasina, mostly written by Russian and Chinese misinformation websites. So they do say two things. One is that we were critical as an actor in toppling the dictatorship or authoritarian regime of Sheikh Hasina. And number two is we are funded by the CIA. Only one of that claim is true, and you get to decide which one. So when we started to do our kind of journalism, I'm not going to go in much into details. Maybe we can discuss during the panel discussion if you have questions. It was also a new learning experience for me. I mean, yes, I have written, I have spoken before about comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. But what exactly does that entail? And very, very, very soon we found out that comforting the afflicted actually entails listening to them and witnessing them. I remember there was a time we were doing a Facebook Live with an activist. Her name is Sanjida Islam Tuli. She is one of the key organizers of My Duck, Mother's Call, an organization of family members of victims of enforced disappearance in Bangladesh. It is pretty similar to the Mothers of Plaza del Mayo in Argentina. And me and Meenakshi Ganguly of Human Rights Watch, we were discussing the crisis of enforced disappearance in Bangladesh. And we were doing this over Facebook. And I could, during the whole session, I could hear someone on Tuli's side. Someone is right next to her. And she is wailing a little bit, but also very intently, listening to the conversation, but we cannot see her on the screen. And after the Facebook Live was over, I asked Tuli, is there someone sitting right next to you? And she said, yes, it's my mother. And that mother is Hajira Khatun. So that was my first virtual encounter with Hajira Khatun. So we started listening to these victims, these afflicted people, the sister whose brother was abducted, the mother whose son was abducted, the wife whose husband was abducted, without a trace. And then one day I received a phone call from, I'm being very discriminatory towards you guys. I'm really sorry about that. So I'll now stick to them, okay? So one day I received a phone call, and the guy on the other line is a Bangladeshi expert, a day laborer in Malaysia. And he starts telling me about a place where he was kept after he was abducted by some plainclothes people. And he describes this horrible, horrible place. And I have written a book about death squads and enforced disappearances and extrajudicial executions, not only in Bangladesh, but across 5 South Asian countries. And I found it very, very difficult to believe him, trust him. So the first phone call was I do not trust a word he is saying. But then I remembered, as a public interest journalist and as someone who lectures my colleagues on these things, right, I probably am breaking a rule. I'm not listening to someone who claims that he has been afflicted by power. So I decide to call him back and ask him questions. And we continue talking for 4 months actually. We continue talking about this place of detention. And eventually, I realized that not a single word he's saying is a lie. His memory is a bit sketchy, so he sort of mixes up dates and days and all that, but he is very, very accurate, and he does have a photographic memory of things he have seen and things he have read. And the most interesting thing is that when he was abducted, he was blindfolded, but he recognized the road his captors actually drove him through, because he is also used to be a bus driver. So he drove that road for many, many years. So we created a profile of this detention facility, and we started our investigation. And eventually, we found one of the most horrific secret detention facility in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, right next to the headquarters of the Bangladeshi Military Intelligence Agency called the DGFI. So that is the first example of how Netra News has been trying to listen to the afflicted and then, share their experiences with our audience. And for that story, we actually were awarded the JIGN Global Shining Light Award Certificate of Excellence. And then another example of listening to the afflicted is actually a bit macabre, I would have to say. These were the people who could not speak. These were the people who could not see. These were the people who were dead already. So we were really listening to dead bodies. More than 2,600 dead bodies, to be exact. And this is our data journalism investigation into the crisis of extrajudicial executions in Bangladesh. And we collected details of 2,600 plus extrajudicial executions in Bangladesh over the course of 10 years. And then we wanted to see what these dead bodies are telling us. So the lead investigator is sitting there, Nazmul. He basically worked through the charts and tried to understand what exactly is happening, why exactly the Bangladeshi government is extrajudicially executing people. What are the agencies involved? And we found very interesting things. One of the things that we found is that extrajudicial executions in Bangladesh, the rate of the killing actually went up every election year, or the year leading up to the election. And there were like some other interesting findings that clearly, I mean, anyone who studies human rights law, for example, the systematic and widespread nature of extrajudicial execution, which would amount to crimes against humanity, was very, very clear from these numbers that we are crunching, or from what the dead bodies were telling us. And the story or the project was titled Body Count, Extrajudicial Executions in Bangladesh, and for which we won the Sigma Award. But we not only listened to the afflicted, we also listened to another group of people, and those were the perpetrators of horrible crimes. In collaboration with the German broadcaster Deutsche Welle, the Deutsche Welle investigative team, we investigated the phenomena of extrajudicial executions, and we managed to talk to two former commanders of the Rapid Action Battalion, an elite police unit, a death squad. And two former commanders of RAB came on camera, I mean, their faces were hidden, but they were there, and described to us step by step how an extrajudicial execution takes place in Bangladesh. So this is for the very first time we're listening to an executioner describing in minute detail how extrajudicial executions are carried out. And I remember I myself interviewed one of them. And he was describing, he carried out, I think, more than 20 executions himself. And he was describing how one day he just decided that today I'm going to find out how much time is needed for a person to die. And turns out that's around 20-30 minutes after you have shot him. So that is the kind of description we are working on. And then because of the significant impact of the story we had, our story was cited, our investigation was cited by, governments worldwide. I think there was a statement from US senators also citing these investigations. So we kept on investigating. And next time we partnered with Deutsche Welle and Süddeutsche Zeitung, the German newspaper, and we investigated the phenomena whereby members of the Bangladeshi death squad RAB eventually end up serving as United Nations peacekeepers. And that was extremely embarrassing for the United Nations. I mean, this is an organization that says we are here to protect human rights, we are here to keep the peace, and then they are actually recruiting people from places like Bangladesh, where these officers, the blue helmets, were accused of engaging in brutal torture and extrajudicial murders. So this is a story that was published back in February 2024, and there was this internal crisis at the United Nations. So you have the human rights people who say, I mean, this is unacceptable, I mean, this cannot go on. And then you also have the United Nations military people who are like, no, we need peacekeepers from Bangladesh to keep the peace in Africa, someplace. So that was a conversation that was going on. And then the uprising of July 2024 starts. And we find out something very interesting, and that is the government, the regime of Sheikh Hasina, deploys the military to quell the protests, peaceful protests by students and the general public. And one of my colleagues at DW, Bigita Shulke, an amazing investigative journalist, she was monitoring the newsfeed. And at that time, Bangladesh was under internet shutdown. And I think Jay mentioned that Netra News was quite likely the only organization that could report from inside the country. So Bigita was monitoring the news feeds, the wires, as we call it, and she suddenly came up on this photo where there is a armored personnel carrier on the streets of Dhaka, deployed against the protesters with a UN insignia. And that was immediately published as a story on DW. And people started asking questions like, why exactly UN insignia can be seen on APCs cracking down on peaceful protesters in Dhaka? And not like random people. I mean, the spokesperson of the protesters, one of the spokesperson of the protesters, Abdullah Nasood, he wrote an op-ed for us, which is where he actually is saying that our question to the UN is why and under which provision were military vehicles and equipment intended for peacekeeping missions used on students and civilians? Isn't this an abuse of the UN? Isn't it against the principle of the United Nations? So you can understand the kind of controversy and scandal United Nations was facing at that time. And we understand that the United Nations actually wrote to the Bangladesh government and said that if you don't stop cracking down on the protesters, we are actually going to expel you from the peacekeeping missions. And that actually did have an impact. And when people do claim that we contributed to the toppling of the Sheikh Hasina regime, I think this gives us some bragging rights. Yes, we did contribute through our journalism. And then finally, I myself could go back to Dhaka, and I could visit the secret detention facility that we reported on, and I could finally meet Hazira, and I actually partied with Tuli, pretty wild, and they're very happy that we are back to Bangladesh. I could go back to Bangladesh after 18 years. And now we have set up a bureau there. And I think it is very important to go back to exactly what this award means for us. It does recognize our work from 2019 to 2024, right? But it also empowers and emboldens the next generation of journalists we are training right now in Dhaka at our bureau office. I am quite sure some of them, if this is broadcast on Facebook or eventually when you will publish it, they will be very intently listening to what I have said here and maybe fact check me, but anyway. So this is a big, big, big recognition for them because they have signed up to, carry out this mission of listening to the afflicted in Bangladesh. And I now give you another photo. Probably this is, that was history, this is future. So this is our correspondent Marzia Hashmi Mumu. And she has gone deep inside the mountains of Chittagong Hill Tracts, an area where journalists are usually not able to go to, but she somehow smuggled herself. And here she is talking to a woman whose husband is in prison because of a military crackdown on an indigenous community, a small indigenous community called the Bombs in the Bandarbans. And I'm very happy and proud to report that our reporters are still now carrying out the mission of listening to the afflicted and confronting power. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'd now like to invite the panelists up, and we're going to have a discussion of what you've just heard, and then we're going to go to your questions. So you are the people formerly known as the audience, but you're going to be more than the audience. You're also going to be a participant in this discussion. Let me do a few brief introductions first. To my far left, Will Dobson is the co-editor of the Journal of Democracy and the author of The Dictator's Learning Curve, Inside the Global Battle for Democracy, which was named by multiple outlets as one of the best books of the year and translated into many languages. Previously, he was the chief international editor at NPR, served as Slate Magazine's Washington bureau chief, and held senior editorial roles spearheading award-winning international coverage and editorial products at Foreign Policy and Newsweek International. His articles and essays have appeared in leading national and international media outlets. Elora Shehabuddin is a professor of gender and women's studies, director of the Global Studies program, and director of the Center for Bangladesh Studies, all at UC Berkeley. She is the author of Sisters in the Mirror, A History of Muslim Women and the Global Politics of Feminism, and other acclaimed works. She is co-editor of the Journal of Bangladesh Studies and serves as on the editorial board of a new Cambridge University Press book series entitled Muslim South Asia. Elora, I'd like to start with you, your reactions to what you've just heard.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and congratulations. I guess I would like to hear, since you ended by speaking about the 24 uprising, how that has changed the media landscape in Bangladesh. You spoke about what it made possible for you, your return after 18 years and setting up a bureau in Dhaka. But in terms of the media landscape, the one that you observed from a distance under the previous regime in Bangladesh, and how that has changed or not in what you've seen in the months since then. Well, over a year now, sorry, yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't think much has changed. Because you need to realize that Bangladesh was a one-party police state for at least 15 years. Or, in some count, it is more than that. So what has happened that the muscle memory of the media, or everyone else involved, is one of censorship, is one of fear. So I think you need to sort of focus now on how exactly we can push for some unlearning. And that is exactly what we are trying to do as Netra News. We are trying to introduce models that can be adopted by domestic media, and eventually, hopefully one day, Bangladeshi media will be able to do the kind of public interest journalism we champion.
Do I follow up?
Yes,
Or-
yes.
Thank you. So your sense is that whatever the mainstream media, the media's attitude had been towards the previous regime has continued even, we have an interim regime in place until elections next year, has continued vis-a-vis the interim regime when you say that they sort of remain close to power, things like that?
Yeah, I think, I'll take it in another way. I think this is very, very frequent in the United States. Whenever you guys are talking about journalism, you do make the distinction between stenography and journalism, right? So media in Bangladesh, it's habituated to a role of stenography. It's just like we are going to only report what the government or the power tells us to. It doesn't matter who is in power. And by power, I not only mean the ruling party or like the ruling interim government, but also corporate power, right? Political power, majority religion, for example. I say this. I think I was saying this yesterday at Berkeley. Worth repeating. I think in Bangladesh it's very, very difficult to criticize and critically cover 3 A's, right? One is Allah, blasphemy is a no-no. Then one is to be Awami League, right? The ruling party led by Sheikh Hasina. And another was army. And we see that, now everyone is criticizing Awami League. It's the fallen ruling party, right? Kicked out by the people. But we don't actually see like much criticism of the interim government. There are some. There is relative freedom right now, I have to admit that. But how exactly to do, dispassionate, but also dedicated, committed public interest journalism through challenging power, that still remains, I think a challenge for Bangladeshi media.
Thank you.
Okay. Will, your reactions?
Well, there are numbers. There's so many, but I want to start with maybe just what you said, which I think it's profoundly significant, the way that you envisioned the role, which is to say that you had a choice to make, and you said, I'm going to set up a newsroom in an environment that may not exist, but we're not going to acknowledge that. We're going to assume the environment that we wish would exist, that we're working in a place with free press traditions, that Bangladesh is Sweden or a more democratic environment to work in. And I think that's a significant thing to say, because in many other places around the world right now, where we see democracy on its back foot and their backsliding is happening, we can witness, and this I would include the United States in this, newsrooms that are actually putting themselves in a sort of a pre-concession posture. We have newsrooms that are saying, the winds are shifting, and how best can I accommodate that? Because I think that by doing so, it'll put us in a privileged position going forward. So perhaps we'll change the direction of the op-ed page, or perhaps we won't make endorsements of candidates where we did in the past. We're going to change standard operating procedure in an effort for a threat that we believe is emerging. And you're doing that in a far more difficult environment, and I think that's just it's beyond brave. I actually think it's far-sighted and quite wise, and I think that your experiment bore that out. But that does lead to another question, which is, how the hell do you do it? Because I'd like to hear a little bit from you on sort of, then you make that decision, but what does that look like in terms of how you led a newsroom to chase down those stories? I know that we don't have enough time for you to give as full an answer as you could, but just if you could give us some sense of, and I'm, as someone who's been in newsrooms and has worked, I just have to know. So how did you make that work in a more granular way?
Oh, okay. So I think, I often say this at other forums also, I felt like since 2019, I felt like I'm not running a newsroom. I'm running an intelligence operation. Because of the kind of crazy secrecy we had to maintain, right? And I woke up every morning thinking that, oh my God, like what's the latest with my ground stuff, right? There were like 4 or 5. So yeah, I think, I developed it sort of contributed to my PTSD, but that's a different thing. But yeah, you have to be absolutely meticulous in sort of, designing your security protocols. But then you also need to decide on, what can you do? What is the capacity you have of the newsroom? We had to decide very early on that we are not going to do daily news. Because with the kind of security requirements, and then the editorial control and quality checks we need to carry out for our journalism, setting up a daily news operation was out of question. Opinion also, that was also another problematic thing. And we started with a very, very small grant of $100,000. So we had to invest that money where we thought we can have the maximum impact. And that is why we set ourselves up as an investigative newsroom, because we knew that if we could break major investigations, right, that is going to have some immediate impact. So that was, I think at one point we were working from 3 locations in Sweden, 1 in London, and 1 here in California. So we had our editors were based in these locations, and then we had ground stuff in Bangladesh. All of them had cover jobs. So during the day they were working at different newspapers and TV channels, and during the night they were working for us. Sounds very romantic, but not really. And that is how we operated. But I'll just go back to what you started with, right? I think it is also very important to know that none of the freedoms and rights we enjoy right now in the modern society, democratic societies, were handed over to us by a king like Donald Trump, right? We fought for it. You guys fought for it. We did fight for our own independence. So when it comes to press freedom, I think it is very important to remember that these are the freedoms we have to continue fighting for. I said, I set up Netra News, we set up Netra News and acted as if this is Sweden or United States. I think my experiment has succeeded in so much I can now set up a newsroom back in Dhaka and act as if Bangladesh, Dhaka is like Malmo or DC or New York or any other city. And that is something no one handed over to us. We gained that through our work. And that is very important to remember whenever we are faced with a crisis of freedom of the press anywhere in this world.
The economics of investigative journalism are historically dismal because In part, creating new facts involves a fixed cost. You have to dig and you have to spend time. And then when you tell a story that changes lives and laws, it spills over onto many people who may not be in your audience. It's very hard to monetize. So my question as an economist is, how did you fund yourself? Where did the resources come that allows you to tell the accountability stories that you have?
We started with a grant from the National Endowment for Democracy. We are a non-profit newsroom, outlet, organization. By our statute, we are not allowed to make any profit. And our only goal, or the only reason we can exist legally by Swedish law, is that we have to serve the public interest. So which means we are not looking for profit. So that sort of helps a lot. We operated all these years with a single grant actually from NAD. But now we have a few more partners who are coming forward. But eventually I think we have to monetize. Eventually we have to go to the very public we claim to be serving. And this I think, and you have written the book on that, right? If you really claim that you are doing public interest journalism, I think the ultimate test is when you will go to the public and say, are you going to pay me for this? And the public says yes, you have passed the test, otherwise you have failed. So that is a test I think now we are ready to sit for, because all these years we are not even allowed inside the country. All these years, the very public we served, we did not have access to them. So now we have that, and now ultimately I think in order to claim ourselves as truly, truly independent, we have to be self-funding.
If you're an economist, everything looks like a market. So my second incentive question is, there's a great book in America called The Journalist and the Murderer, which talks about the difficulties reporters have sometimes getting people to tell a story that reflects poorly on them. So I'm wondering, the executioner, what led to them to talk with you?
I think we developed a relationship, very personal relationship over the years. I hope you don't mind me not sharing much because of source protection. I just say that he was part of a case I was investigating many years back, and for some reason he looked me up on Facebook. He is a very religious man, and I am an atheist. Like everyone sort of in Bangladesh knows that I'm an atheist. I'm very public about it. But for whatever reason, he thought or still thinks that I am someone like Hazrat Umar, who is one of the caliphs in Islam. So I don't know. That is the very reason he started talking to me, and we developed this relationship. And when he started having this serious remorse about what he has done, that was when he agreed to talk to us on camera. So this specific one was based on a very personal relationship I developed with him over the years.
In your comments, and this is going to be a question for Will, in your comments you talked about student protest and the role that student played. And I'm wondering, Will, what's your observation looking across countries on the role of student protest?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's very interesting right now. I mean, mass demonstrations is to some degree how in South Asia people do democracy. It is when so many other roads are closed to find any sort of proper hearing, and there's just no more cost-effective way. But I think what we've seen in the last several years, and very much even now this year, is that there's something different in my sense, at least, of what we're seeing, of what some people are beginning to label sort of Gen Z protests. With Nepal last month, that's the third South Asian regime in 3 years to collapse amid protests. And there's distinctions and unique qualities, but broadly speaking, you're seeing entrenched political elites being challenged by very decentralized, digitally sophisticated youth movements. Tasneem knows far better than I do, but in many cases, in the particular case of Bangladesh, these students weren't even initially mobilized with a goal of toppling the regime. Their goal was to fight job discrimination, and then because of the regime's very poor response, denigrating response, the goal shifted and became Sheikh Hasina's resignation. But we're seeing these types of protests, and elections are not viewed any longer as being a sufficient response because the demand behind them is for something of more genuine change, not a reshuffling of political players from a known roster. And you begin to sort of tally up Madagascar, Morocco, Kenya, Peru, so beyond South Asia. I think it's something I think we're only beginning to understand, but it's definitely rooted in a lack of responsiveness by these political parties and institutions that from the outside looking in appear to have been hollowed out through patronage and corruption. And I guess that, for me, if I may, leads me to a question, which is how, if the response is this interim government in the case of Bangladesh, against those factors, how do you, the very people that were agents in creating this change in Bangladesh, how do you see them viewing the UNIS interim government and its prospects right now?
Dismal.
Dismal.
Number one, starting with the women, because one very important aspect of the movement was it was the women protesters who led it from the front. And there is this very strong argument, empirically backed, that it was the woman who toppled Sheikh Hasina. And after the change, after the interim government took over, they were completely wiped out from the scene. Like now you have like the talks of reform, for example, and women are absolutely absent from the scene, from the table. And that's one of the, I would say, most depressing developments under the regime, under the interim regime. And then you also have what we call the rise of the mobs in Bangladesh, because there is after the demise of a regime that ruled through brutal police force, now the police is not really anywhere to be seen. They're sort of very inactive for good reasons. And the government doesn't really know how to deal with these challenges. So we see, a large number of people who have figured out that, like, if you are loud enough and disruptive enough, then maybe you can get your demands met, because there is this absence of any democratic process. So I think those are the two things. The students in general, there is a difference or distinction between private university students and public university students. We know from our own reportage that it was mostly the private university students who participated in the protests. And they are not really represented anywhere, and they're really unhappy about it. And I think, these are very strong reasons for pessimism, obviously, but we have to be optimistic because we also need to recognize that Bangladesh right now is a country in transition, and I really hope that we will be transitioning into a budding democracy starting from February next year.
Elora, as the director of the Center for Bangladesh Studies, what would you hope that the audience members, and audience members, by the way, I'm about to go to you all for questions, and so please start thinking, what do you think the audience should hear that we haven't said so far about Bangladesh?
Oh, goodness. I think it would be easier if you ask questions and, any of us can answer. I think it's important to understand what a bright light Netra News has been since it was founded. We've had newspapers for a long time in English and Bengali or Bangla for this long history of journalism. But given the direction that the government and its repression took in the last 15 years, it was very hard to trust the news. And people were always looking for other sources, even for that had been, at some point reliable. And I think that's where Netra News came in. And we didn't get the day-to-day news from Netra, but just getting us to think and shining light on stories that weren't getting attention, or speaking to people who weren't being spoken to in other media. I think it was a massive contribution. So thank you all and your colleagues who are here for that. But tied to that, since I have the floor, what are some stories from the July uprising that you feel haven't gotten coverage, and you would want some, your colleagues to look into?
It's a very big market, media market, so many stories. I think we really now need to focus on the accountability aspect of what happened. The United Nations says that there are reasonable grounds to believe that crimes against humanity took place during July and August. Unfortunately, we don't see much reporting, investigation on that. We did a few stories. We ourselves investigated. We did a data story on, again, the people killed and how they were killed. But I would really love to focus on these stories for a while. But also there are stories we have not been able to really cover because we didn't have access to the country. I was showing you the last photo. One of our reporters goes to the Chittagong hill tracks. When it comes to Bangladesh and journalism, Chittagong hill tracks is just a black hole. Nothing comes out. No light comes out of it. I think this is one of the very, very rare occasions where a national, international newsroom goes inside the region and witnesses how this small indigenous community is under siege by the military. You cannot go in or come out of the villages without, the military sort of signing off on your entry and exit.
Which makes you an embedded journalist, right? If you go in with
exactly.
the
So
army.
that's why our reporter had to smuggle herself.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into details.
Yeah.
But these are the kind of stories now I think we should focus more and more on. We will continue listening to the afflicted people, whoever they are. And now turns out everyone wants to talk to us. This is something, we get messages, everyone thinks that, at least Netra News will be one organization that will listen to them, right? Sometimes that leads to very comical engagements I have to endure, military officers who cheated on their wives. They also write to me asking for an investigation into the
You're like a
infidelities,
priest.
yeah, of their husbands. So I mean, keeping those aside, like we do, like now people do reach out to us and say, I mean, this is a problem we're having. I mean, would you please look into this? So yes. Again, I mean, Bangladesh is going through a transition, and we are going through a transition. So we are still like trying to figure out like what is the best way of doing this.
Thank you. So questions from the audience? We have a microphone and excellent. We'll take one. So over there.
Hi, thank you everyone for the talk. I was wondering if you had any opinions for the prospects of journalism in kind of wider South Asia. So I'm a Kashmir scholar, so listening to your talk, I saw a lot of parallels, obviously, enforced disappearance, extrajudicial murder, torture centers, and particularly repression of journalism. And so I'm wondering, as a journalist in a transitional space, as you said, after the fall of a regime, what do you see in terms of the prospects for journalism in maybe Kashmir particularly, but kind of wider South Asia more broadly?
Kashmir and also Balochistan, I mean, it's pretty much the same. And I think Sri Lanka also to an extent is to be that. So yeah, I would say like, yes, I mean, it will be really, really useful. One of the things that we found out works really is that instead of just doing like human rights journalism stories, focusing on the victims, you should also focus on the perpetrators. And that does work as deterrent. So like in Kashmir, for example, like if investigative journalism can focus on who exactly is carrying out these horrible abuses, like enforced disappearance, and you know the mass graves, for example, very, very. I mean, these are open secrets across the Kashmir Valley, right? Who are responsible for this? So I think that can have like far-reaching impact. And who knows? I mean, eventually maybe a newsroom covering the entire region. I mean, that is also a very promising thing, I would say.
Right there.
Hi, Tasneem. Thank you for your talk and congratulations. Could you tell me what your presence back in Bangladesh has had, I know it's only been a few months, on the culture of stenography, like of other outlets? And that's sort of A. And part B is, in the US, what do you think credible outlets can do to influence, to keep other outlets from sliding more and more into stenography in the Trump era?
Oh, big one. I would say, I believe, I mean, in the US, the second one first, right? I think what is very important is that you need to be, a newsroom needs to be credible and consistent and committed. In order for public interest journalism to really serve the US public, the newsroom must target as an audience the entirety of the public. And this is a crisis. I'm so very sorry, with due apologies. I am not really well versed in, US politics, not even geography. Like at the border, I was asked where is Stanford, and I couldn't say, and then the officer said it's in California, and I said, okay, if you say so. So I'm not really very well versed on your history and geography and politics, but this is, I mean, from a very broad perspective. I think, a media organization should include everyone. So I see that there is a crisis here, the MAGA crowd and the woke crowd and the crowd in the middle and whatever. So your society is very, very, very fragmented. And this is a question I asked one of the giants of journalism at Berkeley yesterday. I said, name one outlet that sort of caters to 100%. That I see is missing in this country. When we say public, the public does not mean 99%. It does not mean 41%. It means 100%. So I'd say, like Netra News, when it comes to Netra News in a very small place called Bangladesh, we are respected by the 100%. And that is what I think is missing in this country. Stenography, I'm very sorry to report that things have not changed much back in Bangladesh. But I think if we operate within that market, I mean, now we are, I hate this word, but Stanford people are supposed to love it, disruptors, right? Like, so we are the disruptors. We are creating enough disruption. Already we see that some of the major newspapers have like adopted our storytelling formats even. So we are, fingers crossed, they're going to eventually like start doing more of journalism and less of stenography.
Other questions? Yes.
Thank you so much for this. And thank you as well for acknowledging the fact that women played such a major role in sort of the downfall of Awami League. But unfortunately now we're seeing sort of a very extensive sort of anti-right-wing sentiment coming, right-wing sentiment that is very much anti-gender ideology that's coming out. And also, Elora, I know a lot of your work has also been focusing on sort of women's organizing, and Bangladesh does benefit from having a very strong feminist movement that unfortunately now we're not seeing much happening. So I just wanted to hear and the other aspect of this, unfortunately, is that many young men are also abiding by sort of more right-wing tendencies as well, and many women are actually feeling a lot of attack. So what can the media do to sort of stabilize the situation in this regard? What have been some of the tactics that you've been using? And it's interesting that the images that you showed us were of female figures that you are sort of elevating. But I'm just wondering, overall media, how can you combat this?
Oh, I'm not elevating. I'm just very faithfully reporting. I mean, in my team, I think okay, two of the men are here, but in my team, the best staff I have happen to be women for whatever reason. Can be the subject of a university study. Anyway, but it is very true, not only during the uprising. I mean, Hazera, for example, is one of the very first people to stand up to Sheikh Hasina and set up an organization that eventually contributes immensely to the downfall of Hasina's police state. And all of these are women, her daughters, two of her daughters. And then we have like lots of opposition politicians who are women. So this is not like the July uprising and women's participation did not really happen, I mean, as an exception, right? Like women have been leading the struggle towards, against autocracy. What can the media do? I think the media can witness and report what has been happening. People don't like that when we do it. Like Elora was telling me that, I mean, the right-wingers in Bangladesh were so happy with me personally because of my, alleged involvement in the toppling of Hasina. But when I started speaking for, women's rights, I actually participated at this women's march that was organized against the Islamist radicals, like calling people women whores and all that. When I participated in that march, they really didn't like it. I mean, they felt very, very betrayed. So yeah, I mean, I think we can just witness and keep listening to the woman, and that's exactly what we are trying to do right now.
Sometimes I think when you read histories of crusading journalists, you often wonder, what would it be like to meet someone who changes the world like that? And today we've been really lucky to actually hear what it sounds like to meet someone who speaks truth to power. So please join me in celebrating again the work of Netra News and Tasneem Khalil.